Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. And thanks for the intro. I was going to present this with a colleague of mine, Greg. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. Had a little sports injury, but he's okay. He presented at this conference 3 years ago as well. There's a little bit about me. The description of my job is I try to make things work, in short. I was being facetious there with the 4.67. I made that up. About 4.5 years at HOK. I was born in Malta. That explains my weird accent. I always have to explain it. It's like every time I have a conversation with someone, they don't think I'm from Texas, and it shows. So I started in this business in architecture and engineering, basically trained as an architect. Never really got licensed, got myself into technology, and here I am today. So really enjoy what I do, besides working on projects. Greg is the guy that we say, Greg sees the future. He's there as the innovations director. He looks ahead, and thanks to him is why FME is at HOK. HOK is an architecture and engineering firm, and we started using FME mostly for some data transformations for planning and GIS. But Greg especially could tell, wow, this tool really can do a lot of stuff, and the more that we deal with data in different formats, we're trying to still figure out till this day how can we leverage it to the best to get advantage of the powerful tool set that it has. So the title of the presentation, Prevention is Better Than Cure. As a design technology manager just about 1.5 years ago, I was dealing with at the regional level. And a lot of what we were doing is putting out fires. And you realize that a lot of the user questions or issues that they were having could have easily been prevented if we had we took some preventative measures. There were a couple of images here that didn't pull up, unfortunately, but one of them was a firefighter, because that was a good image to show kind of how we saw ourselves. And the next one was a guitarist with fire behind him, because we would prefer to be seen more as rock stars than just as a firefighter. So one of the things that we wanted to tackle as a first project, I've only been using FME since September of last year. I had some prior experience with some coding and scripting, and I'm fairly good with sort of logic, so this fit in real well. And I was introduced mostly to visual programming through Dynamo, which is an open source product that deals with geometry and data as well. So one of the first projects was to deal with some CAD data. That was a good sort of entry-level project to deal with. Changing layers and re-outputting some DWGs. So I got my feet wet with that. And then the next thing, we were like, well, what if we make a notification system for various things that can prevent those fires, that can alert design technology managers and users themselves. So we already had something very rough in place, but it was sort of a little annoying. It would send out multiple emails per project and things like that. So we wanted to improve it. So central to this was to improve communication. So the first one was, as design technology managers, we didn't even know when projects are about to start. We were supposed to get notified, but we were not being notified. So like, how do we solve that question, that we don't know when a project's about to start? So, a design technology manager, sort of the new age CAD manager, or CAD managers became BIM managers. But we do more than just building information modeling, so we're calling ourselves design technology managers. And in the industry, you see slightly different names for this position, or these types of positions. But we try to strategize with teams to understand how do we split these big models and data sets, and especially since we're working between multiple locations, how do we structure things so that you're not accessing files via WAN or trying to do it via VPN, and how do you utilize the best technologies to get the job done? And we throw in the mix other things such as BIM 360, Revit server, and also Citrix. So how many of you are familiar with Revit? Oh, that's good. There's a few. Just for the benefit of others, Revit is a modeling tool that we use that can allow multiple users to work on the same file. And it does that by having a central file, whether it's on BIM 360, Revit server, or file server, and then user has a local copy. And that local copy is what keeps track of permissions, and when the user syncs with central, the data goes back, it's verified, it's committed, and they continue working. So there were some issues with that workflow from day one that we started using the software, and we wanted to tackle some of those as well. So we'll get to that in the second part of the presentation. That was a little bit of an overview of what Revit does. So the first project was new project alerts. We wanted to do daily notifications of projects. So essentially, we have a custom tool that creates, we have a folder structure, permissions applied, and we try to use this across the board. We have some variation between, say, the US offices or North American offices and London, just because of some actual requirements, not because they don't want to do it that way. But the tool writes to a database every time a new project's created. So IT runs the tool, saves the information to a database. And we thought about enabling functionality inside the tool to send an email when a project got created, but we never really did. And at the time, we didn't know who it would go to because the project manager already knows. They did the request. They put in the request to start a project. So we were just writing it to a database at that point in time. So we thought, well, FME comes around, like we can query that database, package that, and send out a daily notification by region to the design technology manager. So that's what we're going to take a look at. And the goal was that the manager would get an email, summary email, just once a day for their particular region and which projects, and maybe even a hyperlink to go and look at that project. Maybe they can look at data about it, project team and so on and so forth. So I jumped in and I think I'm kind of showing you the hard way, I guess, of doing an HTML table inside of FME. So I was a little bit more specific in my own requirements, wanted the region or office to show up one time at the top and then rows for every project that started since yesterday. And maybe some visual separation between the regions. And one side you're seeing the mobile version, one side you're seeing the version Outlook. So at the time, I didn't know about the HTML reporter. So as I said, I did it the hard way. So here's the workspace. At the top side here, this is sort of an experimental portion where we were trying to say, hey, if anybody at HOK wants to subscribe to these, we could perhaps have a list somewhere, perhaps a SharePoint list or something like that, and they could opt in, and that portion would run and send an email. And if you opt out, you go remove your name from the list. So this was just a mock-up, and we made it work off of a spreadsheet. We never really implemented that portion. But the rest of it, we're going to go through a little bit more in detail. So first, we were writing, we used a lot of conditionals in the attribute creator or attribute manager later on. But I also started noticing, what if I'm reusing this data in other workspaces later on? So at the end, we'll see one more workspace where all this information is now centralized in a spreadsheet instead of inside of the workspace, because otherwise it becomes a maintenance nightmare, having to go through and you hire a new person or someone left or a new region comes online, new office comes online. So first, I started grouping offices by region and adding these output values basically become part of the data that goes in the email. Next, there's, as you can see here, 12 possible values for regional contacts. My email was there so that I could troubleshoot. I could simply change the attribute and just email myself 100 times a day to make sure it's working right. Subject and HTML link. Now, for the HTML table, I kind of think of it as the Russian dolls, right? There's things that go inside of each other. So because I was doing it with raw HTML, I try to figure out a pattern of how can I compartmentalize this. So that's essentially done through multiple attributes that sort of expand with different strings. And that's what you see here. So the first part is this HTML link. It's how do I get that path to be a link in the email. You click on it and it takes you directly to where the project information is. Encapsulated next is the table row. So each row gets a, as you can see here, there's the alignment, project number, and the actual link. So this defines one table in the row. And again, right now all I'm doing is creating attributes. At the time when I did this, I believe you could not reuse the attribute. If you had just created one, you could not reference it again, so you had to create multiple. Nowadays with the attribute manager, you can do that all in one transformer, which is really nice. So next, the aggregator became one of my best friends as a transformer, and I started using the functionality over here to accumulate and use a separator character. Well, it's a character, but I could use multiple characters, so that's where I started using tags and assembling this HTML string. So it's aggregated by office, and then I spent a little bit of time on this. I'm not an HTML expert. I was just looking through and trying to understand how it works. So if you wanted to have something like this, you use a row span or column span, depending on how you want to configure it. In this case, it's a row span. So I needed to count the number of rows, and based on that, that row would collapse into just one cell instead of multiple cells, and I can align the office name at the top. Here's a little bit of a deeper view about how this works. One of the resources that I found that helped me out with understanding how it works. So as you can see right there, row span equals 2, it means that cell is going to be take 2 rows and become one cell. And an example if you use it in a column span instead. So next, we aggregate again by region, and in this case, the separator character is this string right here, which puts the 2 double lines in the mobile version, or that extra space in the Outlook version. And finally, at the time I had seen an example of using the server notification system, but it was a little cumbersome to set up. But once it's set up, it works pretty well. Later on, I found that I actually needed to do a blind carbon copy as well, and I found that it didn't have that feature. So now I sort of don't use this system as much, and I use the emailer transformer directly. It's much easier to set up. This is sort of the raw code or HTML that comes out, and so that little space right there, or that little string right there, is what creates the spaces in between the different regions, or the double line, and each one of these blocks is essentially all the projects by office. And I'm losing the pictures here. There was a more fire picture here, but anyway, it's all right. Killing you by PowerPoint, because I am not going to do a live demo. So the next thing, once we got pretty comfortable with this, everyone liked it, and they liked the fact that they're getting one once a day. Our plan is to actually add more to this email digest so that it includes a little bit more data. We already have some analytics that we write internally to another site, which we can view by graphs and tables and slice the data and so on. But that requires the design technology manager to go to the website and actually click sliders and spend some time. Whereas if you give them a digest of exactly what they need, they can at a glance, within seconds, they look through and they can see the information right there. So the next one was something that kind of plagued us for a while, which is when users accessed files in the wrong way, such as via VPN or through the wide area network, the new Citrix, for example. And you might have a user in Houston, and they try to open a project in San Francisco. And one of the quirks of Revit is that it slows down other users that are doing the right thing when they sync, because it takes forever to release the permissions for the file. So obviously, if we prevented that from happening, that's an automatic improvement in the productivity. So in this case, we're like, okay, now that we learned a little bit more, why don't we filter more data and attack those exact situations. But in this case, instead of just, first we were going to email only a digest once a day, again, of what happened the day before. But now we decided, why don't we run this every hour? And we just look at blocks of hours. That way, if something just happened the past hour, you can react to it. So that's what we did. So we're doing data cleanup. We dropped records of files that were not actually in project folders, like things that people were dabbling with, because we don't really care what's happening there. We really care about projects that do exist in the project folder structure. So here I'm doing data cleanup, and I started using regular expressions. I didn't know anything about regular expressions, and they became my biggest, best friend. And I can't talk enough of how important it is to know regular expressions if you're parsing data out from textual data. So we then go through, check paths. I'm using a transformer here, a custom transformer, the file existence checker. This does a few things. We have a lot of projects that are secure, meaning you sort of have to opt in to work on it. Well, not opt in. You have to be given permission to work on that project. So by default, nobody can access the folder. And if you're going to work on it, you have an NDA disclaimer you have to sign. These are typically government projects. So if the path might exist, but might not have access to it. So the reason you're seeing the split here to two different creators is that if you have a UNC or DFS path, the email system will try to path it regardless. But if there's a space, it will only path the first portion, which is still an incorrect path anyway. So a workaround for that was to just prefix the path with a dot. Very simple, you don't see it that much, and it does not try to create a path that you click on it and it doesn't take you anywhere. So it's just a way to clean that up and address that situation. That also became important for when we were using Revit Server, because the paths returned by Revit Server are not actual paths that you can navigate in the file system. So we attach the information for who to email, and then we use a tester to check between just an attribute, a couple of attributes, where the file is located and where the excuse me, where the data is being accessed from. One thing I just realized that I failed to mention is that this data is being written through an add-in inside of Revit. So every time a user syncs or saves or opens the file, a record is written. And we've had this data for 3-4 years, if not even more, but we weren't really doing much with it, and we decided to take advantage of it. We were using some pivot tables in the past for occasional kind of digging or summarizing information, but now this is where we're taking advantage of it. So then we wanted to, in the last bookmark here, we want to handle the unapproved access. So we're aggregating by file name, because within an hour there might be multiple records for that one file, so we group it by file name. We again attach the context. In this case, it's still all inside of the workspace. We write the data out to an Excel spreadsheet just for kind of record keeping. We can go through and see if there's multiple people doing the same thing, even though they're warned, just to have a little bit more justification to go back to the user. It turned out that we caught a few cases where the access was legitimate. And what's nice about this is that it actually gave us an insight on failures that were unrelated, and we were able to pinpoint, maybe there were network issues, there's equipment that we assumed was there but was not there. And this really helped us out with that. And finally, here I'm using the HTML report generator just to generate this little table right here. It will be highlighted just in a second. There was an issue at the time where we had to do some string replacement from the data coming out of the HTML report generator, which might have been fixed now in 2017. But that kind of gave me a little bit of an insight on how to manipulate the data from the HTML report generator, which we'll see in just a second as well. And finally, split the username, which is first name dot last name. Take the first portion, capitalize it, and send a nice informal message to the user. and use it also as a teaching moment where you give them a link to information where they can read more. And so it's not just a gotcha, it's here's what you need to do, because the managers were already teaching this. It was just not happening for one reason or another. So, and I'm really happy that the instance of these messages has been reduced significantly, where we were getting, 5 or 6 notifications an hour, and now we barely get 2 or 3 a day sometimes. So, and VPN over the weekend, we still see that a lot, unfortunately. So we have more reports coming along, and I'm not going to go through this. Don't worry about it. This workspace, let me go back up. Sorry. This workspace really is crunching data and actually writing new tables that we want to use for further analysis. This portion right here is where now we're running the workspace, this particular workspace hourly. And we started realizing that because of the time zone differences, this is running, say, in St. Louis, which is the central time zone, but we have offices all over the world. It could be as much as 17-hour difference. So figured out a way where you look at data in a spreadsheet and then decide which region should I be pulling data from, because we wanted to always save file data at a specific time of the day, which in this case was like 7 a.m. before the start of the business day. Reason for that, we wanted to compare file sizes. So something very simple, because file sizes can be an indication of further trouble. So the last thing is where I wanted to show you is I used the report, HTML report generator, but then again through regular expressions, started parsing out information and even changing the style sheet, for example, and displaying data in a different way. This was a little bit more difficult to send in an email, so it's still in progress right now. But the idea is to either write an HTML file that can be attached to an email, or the file being put on a website and someone can go on a website and take a look at the data. We did not sort of have a universal agreement on whether to group by project or group by, by user. So do both, right? So that's what we're doing here. We're doing one stream for grouping by user, one stream for grouping by project number. And then as we go through here, we re-aggregate the data, and then there's a few transformers or junctions that I can freeze depending on what I want to produce. And the report, this is a mock-up of that report. Most of it was edited by hand. But the idea is that for a particular region, you could have multiple tabs here. You click on one, this would say group by project, and it would be grouped, the header would be the project and the users and what their access is. And same thing grouped, this by project is by users. And it shows that same user what projects they're accessing incorrectly. Now in this case, it's not a matter of access, it's a matter of whether they're using another tool that we have, which we call the launcher. And what the launcher does is at least creates the local file for you, renames it, and if you're in a remote location from where the data is, it launches a Citrix session for you instead of letting you open it locally. So again, we prevent a wrong decision by a user. We found that sometimes users don't understand that Citrix means I need to open a session where the data is, but they just, Citrix, they opened one in their office, say in Houston, and they access a file in Vancouver. Well, that's not the right way to do it, because we have a distributed system, not a centralized system for our data. Must-have skills, regular expressions. Can't, speak enough about them, and I'm always trying to learn more. Some resources I find very useful for doing this type of thing. The w3schools.com site, great site, lots of information there, very easy to test stuff out. Lots of online HTML editors that let you play around, especially also with regular expressions. You have to do a lot of testing. Some of the regular expression testing I tend to do within the string searcher. There's a regular expression option, and you can put in your own strings and test within it, but sometimes I just default to the websites to do that. that's pretty much it. There's my email, Twitter, and if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them out. Thank you.
We have time for a couple questions.
By emails, because most engineering project managers I speak, we've done this situation. We've done this situation in the past where we send emails to project managers informing them of all the projects that are happening in the city, and within a month, most project managers says, "Get me off that list. I don't want to hear it."
Yeah.
Why? Are they getting kind of email fatigue?
These don't go to project managers, but the design technology managers. So right now, that's why we did it daily. We just kept it at daily. There's ideas about having this data in a site where they can just go and look at the live data instead. So far, that's why we kept it at email. But the reason it's not as bad these days is because we've reduced email use for the team by using Microsoft Teams a lot. So we don't even interact via email anymore. So email has become a tool to really notify about important things again, not chains of back and forth reply and forward. So that's probably why. And for general interaction, we use Teams to chat back and forth a lot more. Otherwise, email, it used to just ding every single minute there's something coming in. That's completely gone, and it gives us the opportunity to have it on a mobile device. So, but email is not the perfect format for everything. So that's why HTML gives us the opportunity to either do it via email and attach and things like that, or view it in a web browser.
Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, David.
Thank you.